Good evening, everybody. And first of all, I'd like to welcome you to School Board Service and thank you because you've taken on a challenging job that can sometimes be thankless, but also very rewarding. And most importantly, you have our future in your hands. So thank you for your service. This is part of the Vermont School Boards Association monthly webinar series called School Board University, School Board U. We do a different topic every Thursday, and we certainly hope that you will continue to join us for the topics of interest. Before we get started on the content, let's just walk through some of the logistics. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Susan Holson, the Director of Education Services at VSBA, Vermont School Boards Association. I'm responsible for all the professional development for school board members and school boards in general. I'm joined this evening by Carrie Lamb, our Director of Operations.
Good evening, everyone. Susan, did you want me to talk about the contact
Go
information?
for it.
Okay, wonderful. So I am the Director of Communications, Director of Operations here at VSBA in charge of communications. So you probably have and or will see a lot of emails from me. If you have not received an email from me welcoming you to the board and or a packet in your mail, please use the message box when Susan describes the message box and let me know that. So give me your name and your school board so that I can make sure I have all of your information. Thank you for being a school board member.
Please also, when you give that information to Carrie, make sure she also has at a minimum an email address for you, ideally also a snail mail address. So the way our webinars work here is we sort of do this as an interactive, but we keep everybody's microphones off during the program, and we rely on the questions box that should be obvious to you. We welcome questions and comments at any time, and particularly this evening where we're geared up for new board members, just jump right in. If I say something or skip over something that you didn't get or that you want more information, please just type it in. Carrie keeps a mean eye on those question boxes, and she'll interrupt us and let us know when people have comments. You may be having the same question. At the end of a webinar, when you leave the webinar format, there will be a very brief evaluation. I think we're up to 3 questions that should take you about a minute and a half, and we'd very much welcome your feedback. Our mission here at Vermont School Boards Association is to make sure that we are providing services and supports that our members find useful and relevant, and so we do really pay attention to what you have to say. And later, probably early next week, you'll receive an email from Carrie with summary information about this evening that includes the PowerPoint deck that we're using, any other resources that we discussed during the course of the evening. If there are questions that I'm unable to answer while we're in program, I will make sure that we get the answers for those things and have all of that in a packet to you in the next few days. The webinars are always archived on our YouTube channel and also available through the VSBA website. We have an webinar archive tab, which I'll point out to you when we jump onto our website in a little bit. So is everybody clear? We're good on that? Okay, so our agenda for this evening is to discuss what the role of school board really is. People join on to their boards for a lot of reasons, and sometimes there's some misconceptions about what the work really involves. The Vermont School Boards Association has developed a proprietary support for you, a platform called The Essential Work of Vermont School Boards, and that will be the basis of what we're walking through tonight. We'll also talk about how education is governed in the state of Vermont. And by that, we mean the oversight and the different players in the structure. Take your questions at any time, and then I'll give you a quick introduction to what the VSBA actually is. So with that said, the role of the school board is to act as a trustee on behalf of the community to provide strong oversight of public education. What that means really is that the board is responsible for outlining and defining the vision, establishing goals for the district, and making sure that you're on a course to achieve those goals and make progress toward the outcomes that you're looking to achieve in your district. And then on the end of it, you're also responsible to oversee and monitor the activities, and ultimately you are accountable to your communities, to your taxpayers. But you are not the administrators of the school. School boards do not run schools. The operations and educational decisions are really in the hands of the experts whom we hire in the body of our superintendents and the rest of the faculty and staff in the school. And we'll continue to talk about that. I think that's probably the biggest misconception that a lot of new school board members have. So a good quickie way to remember that is the board goes first and last. First in setting the vision, adopting policies, establishing parameters and priorities. That provides clarity for your staff, for your superintendent, and the rest of the administration, and it allows them the flexibility to lead and manage and operate the system using their creativity and their expertise. And the last of that first and last is monitoring the progress and assuring that people who work in the district are accountable to the board, and that the board in turn is accountable to your communities. And so a district board really has three jobs. You are ultimately responsible for high quality education for every student in the district. You want to make sure that your public is getting a good return on its investment and that your system operates efficiently, effectively, ethically. And my colleagues asked me to remind you also legally. So what does that all mean? It means at a very high level, the level of oversight, you're setting expectations, you're identifying the goals, you're monitoring the performance and the data. When it comes to the public's return on its investment, that is through the lens of your fiscal management. When you're talking about the high quality education for every student, again, that's moving toward goals that the board has identified as being goals for the district to adopt. It does not mean attempting to educate every student in the district. So I want to introduce you to our website. It is up here, www.vtvsba.org. And the reason for that is because Virginia beat us to vsba.org, so we are vtvsba.org. This is a copy of the homepage, and I'm going to take you there just to introduce you to what the live site looks like. So we have a lot of resources here, a lot of tools. I'm not going to go through the whole site extensively. I mentioned before the webinar archive, that's here under resources tab. You'll see down at the bottom of that list, the webinar archive, and that has all of our past webinars in thumbnail that you can click on and catch whatever topics you might have missed. I want to focus tonight on these toolkits. You'll notice there's one, the new school board member toolkit, which collects resources that are particularly valuable and of interest to new board members. But the heart and the meat of the work tonight, and really your work for the next 2 or 3 years, depending on your term, is this essential work toolkit. When you click on that tab, you're going to get this page. And now I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint where I've recreated this, but each of these is a live link. Each of these domains talks about the roles and responsibilities of the board as compared to the administration, gives you some policies in those arenas and additional resources as well. So that said, let's go back here to the PowerPoint and we'll continue on. So as I said, this is just mimicking what we saw on the web page. So there's 6 domains here. Engaging the community and establishing a vision. Well, that's that big picture first, right? You got to know where you're headed if you're going to figure out whether you're getting there. So we'll focus on that one first. Then we'll talk about policy, the partnership between the board and the superintendent, the development of a budget and financial oversight, which again speaks to making sure your taxpayers are getting a good return. Monitoring progress. Again, if you don't know what you're accomplishing, you're not going to know if you're getting close to your goals. And finally, about board operations. And I'm going to differentiate here between board operations and school district operations. The board's role in operations is for the board. And I'll beat you over the head with that as time passes. So the vision, what is a vision statement actually? It's a very broad-based aspirational statement of where you want your students to be, who you want them to be, what kinds of experiences you want them to have while you have them in your system, and what kind of product you want to deliver when they graduate. So what is it you want them to know? What is it you want them to be able to do? What experiences do you want them to have while they're with you? In order to really get to that, we highly recommend that you work with your community to get input and get them involved and have them buy into this vision as well. And the reason for that is because these vision statements really need to reflect the community's values, which vary by community. And so there isn't one pat vision statement. It's not one size fits all. So you want to make sure that you have an ongoing dialogue with your community, and that's a challenging thing to do. You want to make sure ultimately that you have developed, or many of your districts already have, a working vision statement. So you want to make sure that everybody understands that similarly, and that the board is monitoring progress toward accomplishing or achieving that vision, or at least progressing it toward that vision. And that is your guiding light. So everything else that the board does really hinges on how you set up your vision statement and the goals that follow. Policy is one of the most important aspects of school board work. It is so identified in Vermont statute, the educational statutes. It basically, policies are the boundaries of what your district is doing and how they're doing it. So they articulate your values and your concerns. You may have policies defining some of the educational results that you expect, the community's expectations. There are some policies required by law. And then you delegate. And then the administration takes those policies, and the administration creates the procedures on how to implement those policies. And then it comes back to the board to monitor. So it's a give and take. You're working in partnership to make sure that everything jives. But ultimately, it's the administration, the superintendent's job to interpret those policies for the district. I will also tell you that one of the services that the VSBA provides is a policy service. We have on our website a model policy manual that gives required, recommended, and suggested policies on a broad range of topics. We also, my colleague, Sue Siglowski, is our Director of Legal and Policy Services, and she will work with your board individually to do a policy manual review or revision, or in the case of some of our newly forming boards, starting from scratch. I mentioned before how important the board superintendent partnership is, and it is really important to approach this as a partnership, though technically the board employs the superintendent. And that's perhaps the biggest decision a board makes, is hiring a good superintendent whom you trust. So by Vermont statute, the superintendent is the chief executive officer of the school district and thus accountable for all operations. And that's the broad range of operations, everything from student outcomes to facilities. Obviously, they delegate to their staffs, but not to their boards. And the superintendent and the board work best when there's mutual accountability. So the board provides clear direction and sets the priorities, and the superintendent delivers on those priorities and keeps the board apprised of educational developments and what's going on in the district. So it's very symbiotic. Really, in a nutshell, the board sets the goals, makes sure that there's good communication both ways, and establishes and monitors that clear system for accountability. And that includes superintendent accountability. As I said, the superintendent is in charge of operations and educational leadership and is accountable to both supervisory union and district boards, depending on your structure. And the principal provides the instructional leadership day-to-day in school operations, relies on supervisory union action plans, priorities, initiatives, strategic direction, and the principal is accountable not to the board, but to the superintendent. And my little not so subtle reminder here, boards assure that schools are well run. They don't run them. And, well, how do they make that assurance? They make that assurance by knowing and trusting that they have good people in place who know education, know the system, and are working towards the goals that the board establishes. So there is a chain of command, and this goes back to the mutual accountability. In order to have a well-qualified and capable superintendent work in your district, the board needs to be in a position to make sure that there's that give and take, that mutual accountability. So the board has to provide clear direction and set priorities for the superintendent, and likewise the superintendent has to deliver on them to the board. And it is give and take, and it is back and forth, and as you get into the nitty-gritty day-to-day, month-to-month work of the board, you'll understand how that relationship is so important. And as I said earlier, the principal is the conduit from the superintendent to the buildings, to the individual schools. And they are responsible for what's going on inside that school, accountable to the superintendent to assure that the goals and the action plans of the supervisory union are being recognized and implemented. I'll take a break here. I'm tired of talking. Are there any questions thus far?
I don't have any questions that have been typed in.
Okay. Again, I invite you as we go along, anything that triggers something for you, please feel free to just jump right in. So then budgets. Budgets are an important piece of school board life, both in terms of adopting a budget, getting the electorate to approve that budget, and then following up with oversight of what how that budget is covering, providing the resources that your district needs. So the board's job is to make sure that there are adequate resources to advance your vision. And then you have a high level of oversight to make sure that the finances are being managed well on behalf of the taxpayers, who are the owners, if you will, of your school system. So your job as the board is to ensure that both sides of that equation are working well. And then there's monitoring. So we've talked now about the first, and here's the last, right? There are a lot of different pieces that need to get monitored. Progress toward the goals and the vision, of course, is the first step. And what does that look like? Well, probably involves student outcomes. It definitely involves financial oversight, adherence and appropriateness of the policies, making sure that they are relevant and current. So you want to review them. We recommend every 3 to 5 years, but also to make sure that they are in fact governing your district, making sure that your operations are efficient, ethical, and legal. And part of all of this too is having an annual review of the superintendent to make sure that the expectations of the board are clear. Otherwise, it's shooting in a barrel. Finally, effective and ethical operations. And a lot of boards get pretty tripped up here. It's important to have great communication and trust within a board. And it's not an easy thing to accomplish sometimes. Most people who choose to serve on school boards have some personal agenda why they want to do that, some reason that they're coming to the table. And what's very important is that you're able to leave that personal agenda aside and keep an open mind to hear what others have to say and consider their opinions. So the board chair is really responsible for making sure that the meetings are well organized and well run, and the members have a responsibility to each other to stay engaged and come to meetings informed. So you usually will receive a packet from the district office before the meeting that will have some combination, well, we'll have an agenda, but it will have some combination then of reports from the administration, financial oversight. If you're in budget season, you'll be getting working documents in terms of establishing the budget. There'll probably be policies to review, and all of that will be sent to you ahead of time. And it's your job to make sure that you're familiar with all of it so that when you walk into your meeting, you're able to discuss it and not needing to waste everybody else's time to read things. Finally, we really push people to consider your conduct on the board and the integrity with which you treat each other. Board members are required, the school board is required to have a conflict of interest policy. That's by state statute. And part of making sure you have trust on the board and with the superintendent is also making sure that you recuse yourself even if there's a hint of a conflict of interest. If somebody else thinks that you've got a conflict, you do. And that's a problem. I'm going to try to go back here, if I can figure out how, to our website, which may be easier said than done. I have abbreviated here the school board operations, but if you go back to the toolkit online and go to that domain of ethical and efficient operations, there are a lot of resources there that help define what that looks like. There are recommended policies and practical solutions on achieving consensus and listening to one another. As a board member, you do have a responsibility once the board has made a decision, and we operate as a democracy. So if the majority of the board approves something, even if it's not your position, you're obligated to accept it and embrace it. And that can be very difficult, especially if you have been elected because you represent a certain viewpoint, perhaps, and the majority of the board sees it differently, and thus puts you in a difficult spot. But it is inappropriate for board members to go off and publicly speak to their own agenda. We talk about a board speaking with one voice, and that's what we mean.
Susan,
So,
we have a question.
yes, great.
The question is, does the VSBA have any recommendations or resources regarding the best practices for superintendent performance reviews?
We absolutely do. We have actually a service that we offer for any member district to do a superintendent evaluation. It starts with the goal setting and making sure the job description is clear, and goes right through to the board, or sometimes it's a committee assessment, and the superintendent's self-assessment, and meshing those two, and being able to work from that to establish goals for the following year. And you'll find information about that on our website under services. There's a tab that says superintendent evaluation. So if you're interested in more about that, you can reach out to me or any one of us here at VSBA, and we'll make sure it gets to the right person. We are a small staff. There are only 4 of us, so we all pretty much know what's going on with each other. And thank you for that question. Boards are beginning now to appreciate the importance of that process. Not too long ago, there were superintendents who were working without a vision statement, without a agreed upon set of performance standards or goals, and so nobody really knew what the expectations for them were. And it's sort of operating in a vacuum if you don't know what's expected of you. So we do have, this is a really rushed and microcosmic view of the essential work of Vermont school boards. And so we have an in-depth seminar coming up on June 1st. It is designed particularly for newer board members, but the format is such that we are also inviting experience into the room, because we're going to be working in very interactive settings where the newer members can learn from the more seasoned and bring all of these issues together by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I put this on your calendars. We will hit all of the highlights of the essential work that I've just talked about. We'll talk about engaging the community, defining a vision, monitoring the progress, adopting and utilizing policy, understanding the funding system in Vermont, which, if you haven't jumped into that one yet, is one of the more confusing things that you'll probably ever come across. Again, on our website, there is a video that we created to help board members understand the funding mechanisms, and also help you ensure that your taxpayers understand it as well when you're delivering your budgets for their approval. That resource is a couple years old, so the numbers are a little bit off. We're about to update it once we get the new numbers from the legislature. But in the meantime, it is a great resource, and I encourage you to, I don't know, get a glass of wine and have fun with it. It's about 11.5 minutes long, and I have been told you really need to watch it a few times to let it penetrate. And we also will be talking at this event on June 1st about effective and ethical board operations, and what it means when there's board behavior that is challenging, and how to manage that, and how to work together as a team. So let's do a little case study here.
I'm sorry.
Question?
Yes, there is a question. I thought it'd be a good time to break in there.
Sure.
Oh, we just got another one. So this question is regarding monitoring. What is the board's role in directing administrators if things such as test scores aren't showing positive results, understanding that the board doesn't make curriculum decisions, etc.?
So if test scores are one of the data points that you're monitoring, and they are not performing the way your goals identify then it's the board's job to bring that to the administration's attention. Chances are they'll bring it to you first. And together, you're going to ask your administrators, what is it we could be doing differently? If this is our priority, how are we going to turn this around? And then let the administrators answer that. Let them explain what it is that they think they're lacking, whether or not they have the resources to do what the board is asking them to do. And it's not always a question of money. It may be other kinds of resources as well. And together, you then have an improvement plan that would address the particular data point, whether it's test scores or the number of students involved in co-curriculars or whatever it may be.
Okay, one more question. This is a really good question, actually. It's basically how to wear multiple hats, as we all do in communities. She says, I'm a board member, a parent of kids in the districts, and a taxpayer. If I have an issue, is it ethical enough to, say, write to the principal from my personal email rather than my board email? This is hard to ask and type, she says. Asking about boundaries. I should be entitled to speak as a taxpayer, as well as a parent and a board member. How do you best keep them all separate?
That is a great question and a huge challenge for, particularly for new board members, but really for all board members. So yes, you're wearing many hats, and the best thing that you can do is remember which hat you have on in any given circumstance. If you are, as a parent, approaching the principal on something, obviously the principal knows you're on the board. So it's really important, I believe, for you to say to the principal, as Janie's parent, I have this concern. This has nothing to do with me being on the board. And then you need to see it through that lens. And I shouldn't say most, many school board members, of course, do have children in the system. And so the last thing that you want to do is put pressure on teachers or administrators because you're on the board. Similarly, as a taxpayer, this one gets a little bit trickier because of that the board speaks with one voice. So during deliberations on budget issues or variances and discrepancies as you're monitoring your financials, that's all fine. And you have your voice in those discussions among the board. Once the board has made a decision, the taxpayer in you turns into a board member, and you accept that decision and move on. Tough to do. Anything else, Carrie?
I don't see any other questions right now.
Okay, so now I'm going to put you all to work and get your little typing fingers ready here. You have been on the school board for 3 months, and for some of you, it's probably now 1 month, but use your imagination. Someone you know from town comes up to you in the grocery store and begins to complain about her child's teacher because she knows you were just elected to the board. This speaks a little bit to that last question. I can almost guarantee that this will happen to you. So it's not a theoretical question here. She feels that the teacher is not responsive to her child's needs, but also that she is not attentive to a high needs child in the classroom. She wants the school board to do something about it. So there are a couple of prompting questions here. How do you react? What do you say to her? How do you leave it with her? And what do you do next? I'll give you a couple of minutes.
And Susan, just to clarify, you're looking for them to write in some of their responses in the questions, correct?
Correct. Correct. So let's call it a dialogue box.
Would you like me to start reading some of the answers?
Please.
All right. The first one says, tell her to take the issue up with the teacher directly. The next one says, I would say thank you for informing me. Ask if she's spoken with the teacher and or principal. Recommend that she start there, and if she doesn't get the resolution desired, to please contact the superintendent. We also have that parent attend a board meeting to share their concerns. The next one says, I would listen, explain how the chain of command works, suggest talking with their teacher first, then the principal if not satisfied. The next one says, come to the meetings. They're open to the public and we want you to feel good about your kids' teachers. Exchange information. Make it positive. Do not continue the negative comments in the grocery store. And we have, I would assure her that her issue is important, but that this would be better addressed with the school's principal. If after she speaks to the principal she still hasn't had her problems resolved, she can come to me and I can see if I can help set up a dialogue with the principal. Suggests they discuss the concerns with the administration. I would react with empathy and tell her it's best to go directly to the teacher first, then the principal, if need be, and the board would be more of a last resort. You react by listening and say, I hear what you're saying. You ask her to please follow up with the principal and you send an email to the superintendent about the issue. The next one says, I'm sorry you're going through this. Have you spoken to the teacher, then the principal, and the superintendent? That's the protocol here. If she has already, then I would say, please email your concerns to me or the board chair, and I will be sure the board sees your concern. Thank you for expressing your concerns. Proper channels first, teacher, superintendent, board. First, you listen with empathy. Next, you ask if she has spoken to her child's teacher. If she had asked if she has spoken to the principal. Those steps have likely not happened. If she has those conversations and is still unhappy, have her let you know. I'd start with, I'm sorry to hear you have concerns. Your best at this point is to speak with your child's teacher or principal. Have you spoken with the teacher yet? If you haven't received the response you're looking for, I would recommend going to the principal. If your child is on an IEP, I would encourage you to talk with your student's case manager. Again, if you're not satisfied, go to the special education director. React with compassion and listen to the story. Tell her that this is outside the school board's responsibilities. Explain that she needs to bring this to the teacher or building administrator directly. Tell her to follow up with about her concerns while being clear that I am not in a role to make in-building changes. Sorry if I read that one wrong. I would appreciate that you heard her. Direct her to have a conversation with the teacher and or know about the chain of command. It says demand, but I think she means command. Principal, superintendent, then board. And if she feels her concerns have not been heard after this chain of command, then she should contact the board. Almost there. We have 3 more. I can't answer the question on my computer. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Oh, by the way, if you can't answer it on the computer, if there's something not letting you, then you can always call in on the phone. I can type it out. Validate her feelings. Ask her if she has talked with her teacher and or principal. Keep positive and ask her to attend our community engagement committee. And the last one. Oh yes, then give heads up to the teacher and the principal. That's all of them.
Wow, Carrie, thank you for that dissertation. And thank you all for your thoughtful responses. There were a couple of highlights that were recurring themes. I'm sure you all heard them as well as I did. There is a chain of command. It's really important that community members follow that chain of command, which generally speaking would be the teacher first, the principal next, and the superintendent after that. The reason that's so important is because at the end of the day, one of the roles of a school board is to serve as a quasi-judicial body. So if there is an issue that does not get resolved, the board collectively hears it, hears both sides. Usually it will be from the superintendent, but possibly a principal or even a teacher, and the parent who's bringing the complaint. And then you need to make a judgment. And if you have already been educated about the issues from one side, then you really cannot be impartial, and you would then have to recuse yourself on the basis of a conflict of interest, which doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help your fellow board members. It doesn't help the parent who's got the issue. It does not help the district employee either. Credibility is key. Trust is equally important. So you want, somebody said something that I really liked. You want this parent to feel good about the teacher. You want the student to feel good about the teacher, but it's not the board's job to make that happen. And a few of you came around to saying something close to that, which I also appreciated. There were a couple of things I heard, and I took some notes, and if I missed them, I apologize. Inviting the parent to come to a board meeting is fine, and there is at every board meeting a section for public comment, and if they choose to stand up and speak, then that's fine. But the board will not and should not engage in any public comment that is not on your agenda. These are not public meetings. They are meetings that are open to the public, and public has an opportunity to speak, but the board won't take that up in real time. They may consider it for a future agenda, probably not in a case like this.
We do have another question.
Oh, good.
A gentleman says, could you give some examples of scenarios where school boards serve as a quasi-judicial function you're talking about? This is the first I've heard of it as a new school board member.
Great. Yeah, I will. Back when I served on a high school board, we had far too many disciplinary hearings where a student had violated a school policy and the administration knew the policy, and so if they were going to implement their procedures to a T, they would not have needed to consult the board. But often there were extenuating circumstances, and the administration was seeking either a harsher or a less harsh treatment of the student. And so that would come to the board, and whoever was available to make it at the hearing time, we needed to have a quorum. We would listen to the facts. Both the administrator and the student would speak in each other's company, so they heard what each other was saying. The student had an opportunity to apologize or accept responsibility or balk at what was being requested. And then all parties left the room, and the board came out of executive session and made a motion to either agree with the administration's recommendation or not, and then both parties had to accept the board's actions. Now, if I had been in that situation, and there was one case where I did recuse myself because the student in question was both a friend's child and my child's friend. And so there was no way that I could be impartial. I had known this 16-year-old since she was 3 and known the family. So I said I could make that time for the hearing, but I will not be there. But if I had heard about the whole thing first, as I almost did, because I saw the parent rushing to the hearing as I was on the sidelines at a field hockey game, had she stopped to tell me about it then, and then I went into the hearing, I would have had to recuse myself on that basis. So that's a common example if the administration is looking for some sort of exception to the policy. Other situations can be in, when there are things with teachers involved, you need to be really careful because most of us do not have their contract memorized and know exactly what the protocols are and how that should go. And so if you step into that world, you stand to really complicate things. As a quasi-judicial body, if there is an issue, and again, as a school board member, once I had this happen where a 1-year, she was on a 1-year contract, but effectively was a long-term sub for a teacher who was took a year on maternity. It was a foreign language teacher, and there was a position that came up in the school for the following year as a music teacher. And this person applied for that job, did not have the credentials, did not have any experience, and still when she wasn't offered the position, she ended up filing a grievance through the union because the contract said that, there's a seniority order that needs to be followed. And so the union was representing her in that case. So they actually had an attorney there. And so the school board also brought in our attorney just so we didn't cross those lines either, and had to decipher whether the terms of the contract were being violated. And we were that conversation was the last conversation on the subject. They did not take it to court thereafter. I suppose theoretically they could have, but it resolved that way. So what I think is really important to be careful about in the grocery store is saying too much. And a couple of you, in an interest of keeping your friend and neighbor feeling heard, may have gone too far with that. If somebody had said something about if your child's on an IEP, that is way not necessary because there is protocol. And if they go to the teacher and they go to the principal, they'll find that out. And so if there is an IEP involved, first of all, as a school board member, that's a student issue that is private and to which you are not specifically entitled. So don't, be careful of where you cross those lines. Let me just look at my other notes.
We do have a question if you'd like to take it.
Of course.
It is on the topic of handling complaints. This board member says, you mentioned public comment. Should time limits be placed on each person speaking? We've had times when public comment has gone on and on without limits. What are the best ways to rein it in and keep it fair for all community members wanting to speak? And I have another question after that.
Okay, well, let me take this one and then we'll go to the next one. It is generally speaking up to the board chair to manage the public comment period. If your board customarily has a lot of people wanting to voice their opinions on different issues, and or there's anticipation of a particularly contentious issue on the agenda, the board chair may very well institute some sort of rules, and it's within the bounds of Robert's Rules of Order to do that. Either a time limit or each person may speak only once or only twice, or you can set those kinds of boundaries. In my experience, most of the time that it gets out of hand, it's because the board is engaging. If the board is listening only and thanks the person for their comment after their allotted time, if there is such a thing, and then moves on and does not get tangled up in that particular issue, interacting with the community member, it generally stays pretty smooth and you keep to your agenda.
Okay, you ready for the next question?
Shoot.
Okay, along those lines, what about receiving political emails to call in about a school's water testing? Let's see, it goes into a couple of different here. About a school water testing legislative issue. I received emails on my school board email from people. I said thanks and I will forward to the board chair. I thought it was inappropriate of them.
Well, I'm not sure I'm getting the scenario. What I'm understanding is that community members turn to you as a board member asking you to take a position on something that is being discussed currently in the legislature. If that is the correct interpretation, I'll answer that. If I'm wrong, please follow up and
You said yes.
clarify. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So that's an interesting dilemma because you are a trustee of the system, if you go back to my very first slide, which means technically you're not really representing the opinions of your electorate. You are chosen by them to have the best interest of the school district at heart. That said, as a school board member, as any member of the public, you can contact your local legislators on any issue you want. And you will receive emails from us, from the School Boards Association, because we are, well, one of the functions that we serve is that we are influencing and speaking to public policy on education. And if an important vote is coming up, we will share that with you along with a list of legislators by district and encourage you as a board member to get involved if you have an opinion on it. So if your voters are asking you to do that, one response is they can do it themselves. I mean, clearly you're going to say it a little more diplomatically than that. And another possibility is it may inspire you or trigger you to, in fact, pursue the issue. But you're not obligated. Carrie, was there something else too?
No, that's it.
Okay. So I'm
I spoke too
mindful of
quickly. I just got a
okay.
response from that person. She said, so get involved with my own opinion, not the unified board opinion. In that case, I would want to be sure to speak as a taxpayer. Right?
Got it. So on a legislative issue, as a school board member, if it is a topic on which your board has taken a position by vote or consensus, then you are a board member, and that opinion governs. But in something like this situation with the water treatment, it's unlikely that the supervisory union or district board will have taken a position on how they want the legislature or your local legislators to act on a particular topic.
Okay, that's all that we have right now.
Okay. As I started to say, I'm mindful of the time. I don't want to keep everybody here all night. So I'm going to pick it up a little bit. But again, it's important to me that you get your questions answered. So if we don't get to them during the webinar, we will pick them up and answer them in the email that we send out early next week. So here are just some things, sort of recommendations for new school board members to keep track of as you embark on this journey that you've chosen to accept. You have singular work ahead of you: high quality education, good return on investment, and oversight. Bring your passion, bring your commitment, but keep that big picture in mind and follow good governance practices. And that word governance can be confusing, but in this case, it's oversight. So yeah, you're responsible as a board for the system, but you also need to remember what your place is in the dialogue, yours as a board, not as a board member. Ethics hopefully go without saying, but we also recommend every newly elected board member sign a code of ethics, and that's up to the board chair how they choose to enact that. But you are required to follow the law and uphold ethical standards, and as I said earlier, avoid both real and perceived conflicts of interest. And the individual board member, although you are an elected official, you do not have legal authority in that capacity as an individual. The power of a school board rests with the entity of the school board. So who are the players in Vermont's education? Well, we have the legislature, and they pass the laws. The courts occasionally are called upon to interpret those laws and with regard to the Vermont Constitution. The governor and the State Board of Education, often referred to as SBE, execute those laws and develop administrative regulations. So it's sort of a parallel to board work, right? The legislature serves as the board. They set the direction, they set the policies. The governor and the state execute, and the Agency of Education actually does the implementation. So that's sort of the power structure at the state level. Governance in Vermont is transitioning right now. So until Act 46 of 2015, most supervisory unions around the state were structured something like this. There was one superintendent. There were multiple districts, in this case 5. Each district had one school. Each school had its own school board, and the superintendent then had to answer to 6 different boards, the 5 school boards and the supervisory union board, which is made up of members from the district boards. And in a lot of districts, there's no school, but there's still a board. So that was a complicated and arguably convoluted structure in terms of, for anybody who's ever worked in any kind of corporate setting, you know, it's almost impossible to have more than one master, if you will. So we are evolving, and we're seeing a lot of this kind of structure now, what I call a partially consolidated governance structure. So there's still a supervisory union, there's still one superintendent, and some of the schools have come together because they are of like configuration. Here in this case, it's pre-K to 6. The pre-K to 8 couldn't consolidate with them because what would they do with their 6th and 7th and 8th graders? And similarly, school E is pre-K through 12. So they chose to divide that supervisory union that used to have 5 boards. They now have 3. There's one consolidated district there. And going to the extreme, and we see this now in more and more places, a supervisory union morphs into a supervisory district. One superintendent, one board, all of those same 5 schools. And that structure can happen and has happened mostly in the case of a union high school, where there were multiple towns sending towns into one high school. They all became one unit. And these boards tend to be large, because part of the consolidation is to make sure that the local voices are still heard. Okay, so with that frame in mind, I'll bring you back to your central responsibilities as a board member, which are high quality for every student, high quality education, a good return on the investment for taxpayers and citizens, and effective, efficient, and ethical operations. And with that, I ask you, what is your most pressing question? Can we address some of that here this evening?
I'm not seeing any questions right now. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
How do I learn everything strategic?
Wow, that's a big one. I would start by making your board chair is your direct connection to district practices, policies, and business. So I would start by asking the board chair for any resources that you think may exist, like a continuous improvement plan at the school level, a work plan, usually also at the school level, a strategic plan, hopefully at the supervisory union level, to which all districts have signed on. Certainly a vision statement and a mission statement, any board goals that have been set and what time frame are associated, and what kinds of expectations have been communicated to the superintendent. I would say that would be a good starting place to get a feel for the strategic level of work that you're looking at.
Okay, they're starting to pop up now.
Okay.
One is, I don't know if you're going to be able to address this here, but it's keeping a small school open.
Yeah, I really can't take that one on right now. It's very complicated, and with the controversies going on right now with consolidations and Act 46 in some communities, and the articles of agreement that have been used to encourage communities to take on consolidation, it's a really district by district situation. If you want to raise that as a specific question to us, I'm happy to try to tackle it. Just shoot me an email.
Okay, the next one says, how can I make a difference? And I'd like to say you already are making a difference.
Thank you, Carrie. You're exactly right. School boards are important. Our children are the future, and we are trying to do for them what we believe is right. And in that way, you are making a difference. Choosing and agreeing to serve on your board is certainly a big step in that direction, even though sometimes it may not feel like it when you're on a board with differing opinions and perhaps a decision goes in a different direction than you would choose. It can be very frustrating, but you are making a difference.
And I have one more. And
Great.
this is a big topic, and it might be a good thing for a webinar. It's special education. Oh, there's another one just popped up. Special education, financial, regulatory, where to start?
Yeah, I think that Carrie, that's a great idea. I'm going to put that on our list of future webinar topics because it is complicated, and at the same time, from a board perspective at, let's say, 30,000 feet, there are some pieces of that are important to know, like the financing, and there are other pieces that are really implementational, like IEP definitions and 504 plans and all of that. And just to complicate things, the laws are currently in process of changing.
Right. In our essentials book, also in the back of it, we have a glossary that has all of those wonderful things defined, so it'll make it easier for discussions.
Which will also help the previous question about the strategic. Where do you start with that? There's a ton of acronyms, like in any field, but I think education is more prone to them than most. So in the back of the book that Carrie's just referencing, and I hope that you have all received or will be receiving a copy from your superintendent or your board chair, there's a multiple page glossary that helps decipher some of the jargon. And my best advice on that one is don't be afraid to ask.
Right,
We've all been new board members at one time.
Yeah. We have a couple more questions pop up. Oh, and there's another one. As a board member, how can you increase the academic value of the education without overstepping the board's authority?
I'm not 100% clear on what is meant by academic quality. Academic quality, was that the term you used,
Academic
Carrie?
value.
Okay, I'm not sure what that means. So I'm not really clear on how to answer that.
I would encourage this board member to give us a call in the office. That sounds like something that would be a lot more specific to your situation. Okay, so the next question is, how do you make the community realize some decisions aren't as easy as snapping your fingers, and there are domino effects that are that have very real possibilities?
Great question, and not a simple answer. We really encourage boards to have some sort of outlet for an ongoing dialogue with community, and it can take a lot of different, it can look like a lot of different things. One board recently instigated something they call trash talks, where board members get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to the transfer station and just talk to people. And once you have that kind of dialogue and trust, then it's much easier to convey that kind of message. On an ongoing basis with, I guess, let me say this. The importance there is that there's two-way communication, and often boards tend to use their opportunities to converse with the public as a one-way dialogue of disseminating information. And it's very difficult when you only speak to your townspeople around a budget once a year to help them understand the trade-offs. But trade-offs they are, and some boards have a whole communication strategy. I know when I was on a board, we had an agreement with our local paper where we had a monthly article written by the board talking about what we were struggling with and what we were working on, and people could choose to read it or not, of course, but at least we were trying to convey that information. And there are a lot more communication channels now than there were when I served on my board.
Okay, and one last question.
Okay.
This is a perfect question for you, too. This is right up your alley.
Okay.
We are contemplating a board retreat. What are your recommendations in identifying new board goals with new members? I ask this because at this time, board members did not have ideas ready for goals.
So sadly, to me, a lot of boards have not done the hard work of creating a vision for education in the district. And especially as boards are consolidating, I'm seeing this more and more. So I would encourage a board that does not have a real clear vision statement to start with that, and to work from that to strategic goals and then setting priorities. And that is all work that is very well done at a retreat, because you're not bogged down with the day-to-day board work that is also a reality. I personally encourage boards to utilize an outside facilitator so that all board members can participate in the discussion and have an open exchange of ideas. And that is a service that VSBA provides. Actually, it's likely to be me showing up. But there are other facilitators available as well. And the important thing is that you're working with somebody who understands what the desired outcomes of the retreat are. There are some boards who just don't get the idea of this ethereal aspirational vision statement, and so they are just spinning wheels because they don't really have goals for the board or for the district. Carrie?
I think we have gotten all of the questions answered. Thank you.
Okay, and again, let me repeat, feel free to shoot us an email or call the office anytime. I'm just going to race through these next few slides. This is the Vermont School Boards Association. Here is our vision statement. We are a private organization owned by our members. That would be you, and really supervisory unions are technically our members, and the school board members who serve on their boards. And as such, we have sort of a dual mission here. One is that we are a collective voice for school boards. As I mentioned earlier, both our executive director, Nicole Mace, and my colleague Sue Siglowski, who's our Director of Legal and Policy Services, are registered lobbyists. They're over at the State House pretty much every day during session. We testify on behalf of public education. We we sit in on committee meetings. We keep our fingers on the pulse. We have really good communication and channels with the agency and the state board and the General Assembly. And the flip side of that is we then inform our members, that's you, about public policy deliberations that are going on. I mentioned sometimes you may get an email from us saying, hey, heads up, tomorrow the Senate's voting on the lead in schools and we're asking you to communicate with your legislators. We also send out during the legislative season a weekly education legislative report so you can read up on what's going on at the state level. And we do a webinar annually, usually it's in January, anticipating the next legislative season. So that's one of our missions. And the other is supporting school boards with professional development. And here's just sort of a run through. We're always available by phone and email. Any of us are. There's ongoing training and conferences. I mentioned the live workshop in June. We have monthly webinars. We have regional meetings, which we encourage all members to attend. We come to you and you get an opportunity to meet with other local school board members. We also have an annual conference, which is a day and a half this year. It's going to be early November, and lots of good content and provocative keynotes and workshop sessions. We will come to you and help you with your meeting planning and facilitation. We do regular email updates. We have tons of resources on, oh, I have a typo on that slide. Shame on me. It's, oh, maybe I can fix it. No, I can't fix it right now, but it's btvsba.org. We do all these different kinds of consulting, including, somebody asked earlier about superintendent evaluation, collective bargaining supports, if you're in the throes of bargaining and happen to be on that committee. And we also have some publications. We put out the Vermont Education Law Book once a year, which is sort of the definitive resource. The Agency of Education and State Board of Education come to us for that book. We send out a member newsletter 3 times a year. And we also, as Carrie and I were talking about, we have a workbook on the essential work for Vermont school boards. So we keep busy here, and we're small. There are 4 of us. You've met me and Carrie this evening. I'm sure you will meet Sue and Nicole in the days and months to come. We are here for you, our members, and that is why we wake up in the morning. We all have Vermont's children at heart, and we all recognize their importance in our future as a state and as a democracy. So we want to give them everything we can. And we, again, appreciate that you are doing the same. It's hard work, especially as a volunteer. But thank you. Thank you also for joining us this evening. When we sign out of here, please do complete that quickie evaluation. There am I, both by email and phone. Reach out anytime. Love to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good night, everyone.